Jake Garrison wiped the dust from his face and looked out at the endless sky. The twin suns of New Montana were setting, painting the horizon in shades of orange and purple. He had lived on this frontier colony for 15 years now, and he still found the sunsets beautiful. His cybercattle ranch sat on the edge of human space, far from the busy cities and crowded stations of the inner worlds. Out here, a man could breathe. Out here, a man could be alone with his thoughts. And Jake had many thoughts these days. His wife had passed away 3 years ago from a sickness the colony doctors could not cure. Since then, the farmhouse felt too big and too quiet. He worked from sunrise to sunset, caring for his herd of mechanical cows. They were good machines, reliable and strong, their metal bodies designed to produce synthetic milk and meat for the colony. But machines did not laugh. Machines did not hold your hand when the nights grew cold. Jake was 52 years old, and he was tired. He walked toward the barn as the darkness crept across the land. The cyber cows needed their evening check, and their feeding systems needed monitoring. It was simple work, but it kept his hands busy and his mind from wandering too far into sadness. As he approached the barn, he noticed something strange. The lights on the feeding stations were blinking in an odd pattern. The cyber cows were gathered at the far end of their enclosure, their sensors beeping in confusion. Jake frowned and quickened his pace. In all his years of ranching, he had never seen the herd act this way. He pushed open the barn door and stepped inside. The smell of oil and synthetic nutrients filled his nose. He grabbed his plasma lantern from its hook and turned it on, casting a warm glow across the space. Everything seemed normal at first. The feeding troughs were in place. The machinery hummed quietly, but then he saw it. A small figure was crouched in the corner of the barn, half hidden behind a stack of supply crates. Jake's heart jumped in his chest. He raised the lantern higher and took a slow step forward. The figure turned to face him, and Jake felt his breath catch in his throat. It was a child, but not a human child. She had skin covered in tiny scales that shimmered purple in the lantern light. Small wings were folded tightly against her back, and her fingers ended in delicate claws. Her eyes were large and golden, like pools of melted sunshine, and they were filled with fear. She was holding a handful of nutrient pellets meant for the cyber cows. Some of the pellets had fallen to the ground around her feet. She had been eating them. Jake stood very still. He had heard stories about a race of dragon-like beings from a distant part of the galaxy. The stories said there had been destroyed in a great war, and the survivors had scattered across the stars like leaves in the wind. But those were just stories told in bars and trading posts. He never thought he would see one with his own eyes. The little dragon girl pressed herself against the wall, trembling. She looked so small, so fragile. Jake could see her ribs beneath her scales. She was starving. "Please," she whispered. Her voice was soft and broken, like she had not spoken in a long time. "Please do not hurt me." Jake slowly lowered the lantern. He took a deep breath and forced his racing heart to calm down. Whatever this creature was, she was just a child. A hungry, frightened child. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said gently. He knelt down so that he was closer to her level. "What's your name?" The dragon girl watched him with those big golden eyes. She seemed to be studying him, trying to decide if he was dangerous. After a long moment, she spoke again. She said, "My name is." "Hello, I'm Jake." He gestured at the nutrient pellets in her hands. "Are you hungry?" She nodded quickly, then looked down at the pellets with shame. "I am sorry. I did not mean to steal, but we have not eaten in many days." Jake noticed the word she used. "We, not I." "We?" he asked carefully. "Are there others with you?" His eyes filled with tears. She tried to speak, but the words seemed stuck in her throat. Finally, she managed to whisper, "My sisters. They are hiding. They are so hungry, so cold." She looked up at Jake with a desperate hope that broke his heart. "My sisters need food and love. Please, can you help us?" Jake felt something shift inside his chest. He thought of, and how she had always said that kindness was the most important thing a person could give. He thought of the empty rooms in his farmhouse, the silence that pressed down on him every night. He thought of this small creature in front of him, alone and afraid in a universe that did not want her. He reached out his hand slowly, palm up, showing her he meant no harm. "How many sisters do you have?" he asked. "Four," said. "Nara is the oldest, then and Sira. They are twins, and Pip is the smallest. She is just a baby." Fresh tears rolled down her scaled cheeks. "Our mother died when we crashed. Our father died saving us. We have no one left." Jake closed his eyes for a moment. 5 orphaned children, alone on a strange world with nothing but each other. The thought of it made his soul ache. He opened his eyes and looked at. She was still trembling, still waiting for him to decide her fate. In that moment, Jake made a choice. He did not think about the consequences. He did not think about what the colony government would say or what his neighbors might think. He simply listened to the voice in his heart. "Take me to your sisters," he said. "I'm going to help you." Stared at him in disbelief. "You will help us, but you do not know us. We are not human. We are nothing." Jake shook his head firmly. "You are not nothing. You are children who need help, and I am a man with a warm house and plenty of food." He stood up and offered her his hand again. "Come on, show me where they are." Hesitated for only a second. Then she reached out and took his hand. Her small clawed fingers felt cool against his rough skin. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." Jake nodded and gave her hand a gentle squeeze. He did not know what the future would bring. He did not know if he was making a mistake. But as he walked out of the barn with the little dragon girl beside him, he felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He felt hope. The night was cold and dark as Jake followed across the frozen landscape. The twin moons of New Montana cast silver light on the ground, making the frost sparkle like tiny diamonds. Jake pulled his coat and kept his eyes on the small dragon girl walking ahead of him. She moved quickly despite her weakness, driven by love for her sisters. They walked for nearly an hour, past the edge of Jake's property and into the rocky wilderness beyond. Led him down a steep hill and into a narrow ravine that Jake had never explored before. The walls of the ravine rose high on both sides, blocking out the moonlight and plunging them into shadow. "Here," said quietly. She pointed toward a dark shape at the far end of the ravine. "They are inside." Jake lifted his plasma lantern and saw it clearly for the first time. It was an escape pod, small and badly damaged. One side was crushed inward and burn marks covered the metal surface. It had clearly crashed hard. The fact that anyone inside had survived was a miracle. Ran ahead and knocked on the pod door in a special pattern. 3 quick taps, then 2 slow ones. A moment later, the door creaked open just a crack. A pair of green eyes peered out from the darkness inside. A voice said, it was older than stronger but still young. "Did you find food?" "I found something better," said. She stepped aside so that Jake could be seen. "I found help." The door opened wider and Jake got his first look at Nara. She was taller than, maybe the size of a human teenager. Her scales were deep green like forest leaves, and her golden eyes were sharp with suspicion. She held a piece of broken metal in her hand like a weapon, ready to defend her family. "Who is he?" Nara demanded. "Is he a hunter, a slaver?" "No," said quickly. "He is kind. He gave me food and did not hurt me. He wants to help us." Nara studied Jake with distrust. He could not blame her. These children had lost everything. They had been hunted and hurt. Trust was not something they could give easily. Jake spoke slowly and calmly. "My name is Jake Garrison. I have a farm not far from here. I have food, water, and a warm house with empty rooms." He paused and looked past Nara into the dark pod. He could see more small figures huddled together inside. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to help." Nara did not lower her weapon. "Why? Why would a human help us? Your kind has never helped us before." Jake thought about her question. Why was he doing this? He was an old man with a quiet life. He had no reason to get involved in the troubles of alien refugees. But when he looked at these children, he did not see aliens. He saw orphans. He saw fear and hunger and loneliness. He saw pieces of himself. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply, "and because I know what it feels like to be alone." Something in Nara's eyes shifted. The suspicion did not disappear completely, but it softened a little. She lowered the metal piece and stepped aside. "Come in," she said, "but move slowly. The little ones are scared." Jake ducked his head and entered the escape pod. The inside was cramped and smelled of old metal and sickness. He raised his lantern and felt his heart break at what he saw. 4 dragon girls were huddled together on a torn blanket in the corner. Nara stood guard near the door. 2 others, identical in appearance with blue scales, held each other tightly. They must be the twins and Sira. And in the middle of them all, wrapped in a dirty cloth, was the smallest one. Pip was tiny, no bigger than a human toddler. Her scales were pale pink, almost white, and they had lost their shine. Her eyes were closed and her breathing was shallow. Jake could see immediately that she was very sick. "She won't wake up," one of the twins whispered. Jake could not tell if it was Sira. "She has been sleeping for 2 days. We tried to keep her warm, but nothing works." Jake knelt down beside the little hatchling. He had raised livestock his whole life. He knew the signs of an animal that was failing. Pip was starving, dehydrated, and cold. If she did not get help soon, she would die. He turned to Nara. "I need to take her to my house, all of you, right now. She needs warmth and medicine." Nara's face twisted with worry. "Can you save her?" "I don't know," Jake admitted. "But I know someone who might be able to help. A doctor in the colony. She's a good person." The twins looked at Nara with pleading eyes, grabbed her older sister's hand. "Please," Nara begged. "We have to try. If we stay here, Pip will die. We will all die." Nara closed her eyes. Jake could see the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. She was just a child herself, but she had been forced to become a leader, a protector, a mother to her younger sisters. It was a burden no one her age should carry. Finally, she opened her eyes and nodded. "Okay," she said. "We will go with you. But if you betray us, if you try to hurt my sisters, I will kill you myself." Jake met her gaze without flinching. "Fair enough." He gently lifted Pip into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, like a bundle of dry leaves. He could feel her tiny heart beating weakly against his chest. The twins gathered around him, watching their baby sister with terrified eyes. "Stay close to me," Jake said. "The walk back is long, but we can make it." They left the broken escape pod behind and climbed out of the ravine. The 5 dragon sisters followed Jake across the frozen ground, their breath making clouds in the cold air, walked beside him, her hand resting on Pip's blanket. Nara brought up the rear, still watching Jake with careful eyes. As they walked, Jake looked down at the small creature in his arms. Pip stirred slightly and made a soft sound, almost like a kitten crying for its mother. "Hold on, little one," Jake whispered. "We're almost there, just hold on." The farmhouse lights appeared in the distance, glowing like a beacon of hope in the darkness. Jake quickened his pace. He did not know if he could save these children. He did not know what tomorrow would bring. But he knew one thing for certain. He was not going to let them face the darkness alone. When they finally reached the farmhouse, Jake pushed open the door and led the dragon sisters inside. Warmth washed over them, and the twins let out small cries of relief. Jake carried Pip to the couch near the fireplace and laid her down gently. "There's food in the kitchen. Help your sisters eat something. Nara, keep Pip warm. I need to call the doctor." For the first time since they met, Nara looked at Jake with something other than suspicion. It was gratitude. "Thank you," she said quietly. Jake nodded and reached for his communicator. The night was far from over, but for the first time in 3 years, his house was full of life again. Dr. Grace arrived at the farmhouse just before midnight. She was a small woman with gray hair and kind eyes, and she had been treating patients on New Montana for over 20 years. When Jake called her and explained the situation, she did not hesitate. She grabbed her medical bag and drove straight to his ranch. "Where is she?" Grace asked as she stepped through the door. Jake led her to the couch where Pip lay wrapped in blankets. The little dragon girl was still unconscious, her breathing shallow and weak. Grace knelt beside her and began her examination. The other sisters watched from across the room, their golden eyes wide with fear. "I've never treated a before," Grace admitted, "but the basics should be similar. Dehydration, malnutrition, hypothermia." She looked up at Jake. "You found them just in time. Another day or two and this little one would have been gone." She opened her medical bag and pulled out several devices. She worked quickly and carefully, injecting Pip with fluids and nutrients, warming her body temperature, and monitoring her vital signs. The minutes stretched into hours. Jake made coffee and sandwiches for everyone, though the Dragon sisters ate the nutrient bars he had brought from the barn instead. Just before dawn, Pip's eyes fluttered open. "Nara," she whispered weakly. Nara rushed to her side and took her tiny hand. "I'm here, little star, I'm right here." Pip looked around the room with confusion. "Where are we? Is this heaven?" Despite everything, Jake felt himself smile. "No, sweetheart, this is my house, you're safe now." Pip stared at him for a long moment. Then she smiled, showing tiny white teeth, and closed her eyes again. But this time her breathing was strong and steady. She was sleeping, not dying. Grace packed up her equipment and pulled Jake aside. "She'll need rest and proper food for at least a week. The others are malnourished too, but not as badly. I'll come back tomorrow to check on them." She paused and gave Jake a serious look. "You know this is going to cause problems. The colony government has strict rules about alien refugees." Jake nodded slowly. "I know, but I couldn't just leave them out there to die." Grace studied his face for a moment, then smiled. "Would be proud of you, Jake. She always said you had the biggest heart of anyone she knew." After Grace left, Jake showed the sisters to the spare bedrooms upstairs. There were 3 empty rooms, more than enough space for 5 small dragon girls. Nara and Pip shared one room, the twins took another, and got the smallest one for herself. They were too tired to argue or ask questions. They simply crawled into the clean beds and fell asleep almost immediately. Jake sat alone in the kitchen as the sun rose over the horizon. He was exhausted, but he could not sleep. His mind was racing with thoughts and worries. What had he gotten himself into? How was he going to feed and care for 5 children? What would the government do when they found out? But beneath all the worry there was something else, something warm and unexpected. For the first time in 3 years, his house did not feel empty. The days that followed were difficult but full of life. Jake learned that children were not so different from human children. They needed food, shelter, education, and love. They argued with each other and made messes. They laughed at silly things and cried when they were sad. They asked 1,000 questions about everything they saw. Became fascinated with cooking. She spent hours in the kitchen, experimenting with different ingredients and creating strange but tasty dishes. Jake learned to enjoy her cooking, even when it turned strange colors or made unusual sounds. The twins and Sierra discovered music. Jake found an old guitar in his closet that had belonged to, and he taught them how to play. Within a week, they were creating their own songs, their voices blending together in perfect harmony. Nara took an interest in the cyber cows. She had a natural talent for technology and quickly learned how to maintain and repair the mechanical herd. She improved the feeding systems and increased milk production by 15%. Jake started calling her his assistant manager, which made her scales flush with pride. And Pip, the smallest one, simply wanted to be loved. She followed Jake everywhere, holding onto his leg or riding on his shoulders. She called him funny names and brought him flowers she picked from the field. She fell asleep in his lap every evening while he read stories from his old book collection. Not everyone in the colony was happy about the new arrivals. Some neighbors whispered about Jake and his strange. A few even called the sheriff to complain about aliens living in the area. Sheriff Daniel Cooper came to the farm one afternoon, his face serious and official. "Jake, I've been getting complaints," Daniel said. "People are nervous about these dragon children. They want to know if they're dangerous." Jake crossed his arms. "They're children, Daniel. They eat cereal and watch cartoons. The most dangerous thing they've done is clog my bathroom drain with their scales." Daniel looked past Jake to where Pip was playing in the yard, chasing butterflies with her tiny wings. He sighed and rubbed his forehead. "Look, I'm not here to cause trouble, but the colonial government is going to find out eventually. You need to register them as refugees and apply for custody permits. Otherwise, they could be taken away." Jake's heart went cold at those words. Taken away. He thought of Pip's smile and cooking and Nara's fierce protective love. He thought of the twins singing in the evening and the sound of laughter filling his house. "What do I need to do?" he asked. Daniel gave him a folder full of forms and documents. "Start with these. I know a lawyer in town who might help you. Her name is Molly. She used to be a teacher, but now she handles immigration cases. Tell her I sent you." Jake thanked the sheriff and got to work. The paperwork was complicated and frustrating, but Molly was patient and kind. She visited the farm several times to meet the sisters and gather information for their case. "This won't be easy," Molly warned him. "There are people in the government who don't want alien refugees in the colony, but there are also people who believe in doing what's right. We'll fight for them, Jake. I promise." Weeks passed, and the Dragon sisters slowly became part of the community. Grace gave them regular checkups. Molly taught them reading and writing. Ben, the grumpy mechanic from town, let Nara help in his workshop after she fixed his broken tractor with nothing but spare parts and determination. Even some of the suspicious neighbors began to soften when they saw the children playing and laughing like any normal kids. One evening, as Jake sat on the porch watching the twin suns set, Pip climbed into his lap and looked up at him with her big golden eyes. "Jake," she said in her small voice, "are we going to stay here forever?" Jake wrapped his arms around her and held her close. "I'm going to do everything I can to make that happen, little star," he said. "Everything I can." Pip smiled and snuggled against his chest. In that moment, Jake realized something important. He was no longer just a lonely old farmer taking care of strangers. He was becoming something he never expected to be again. He was becoming a father. The peace did not last. It never does on the frontier. 3 months after Jake took in the Dragon sisters, a large ship appeared in the sky above New Montana. It was not a trading vessel or a colony supply ship. It was a corporate security cruiser, black and threatening against the blue sky. The name painted on its side made Jake's blood run cold: Helix Corporation. Sheriff Daniel Cooper called Jake that same morning. His voice was tense and worried. "Jake, we have a problem. Corporate lawyers landed at the spaceport an hour ago. They're claiming the children are their property, escaped laboratory subjects from some kind of genetic research program." Jake gripped the communicator so hard his knuckles turned white. "Property. They're children, not machines." I know. But Helix is big, Jake. They have money, lawyers, and private security forces. They're threatening to sue the entire colony if we don't hand over the girls." Jake looked across the kitchen where was teaching Pip how to make pancakes. The little dragon girl was covered in flour and giggling as the batter dripped onto the counter. Nara was helping the twins with their homework at the table. It was a normal morning, peaceful and full of love. He was not going to let anyone destroy this family. "Tell them to come to my farm if they want to talk," Jake said coldly. "I'll be waiting." The Helix representatives arrived 2 hours later. 3 sleek vehicles rolled down the dirt road and stopped in front of Jake's farmhouse. Men in black uniforms stepped out, their weapons visible on their hips. Behind them came a man in an expensive suit with cold eyes and a thin smile. He introduced himself as Victor Hayes, Chief Legal Officer of Helix Corporation. "Mr. Garrison," Victor said smoothly, "I trust we can handle this matter quickly and without unnecessary conflict. Simply surrender the 5 specimens and we'll be on our way. No charges will be filed against you or the colony." Jake stood on his porch with his arms crossed. Nara stood beside him, her green scales bristling with anger. She had refused to hide inside with her sisters, insisting that she would face any threat alongside Jake. "They're not specimens," Jake said firmly. "They're children, and they're staying with me." Victor's smile faded slightly. "I'm afraid you misunderstand the situation. These creatures were created in Helix laboratories using advanced genetic engineering. They are corporate assets that escaped during an unfortunate incident at one of our research facilities. We have documentation, patents, and legal ownership certificates." "I don't care about your documents," Jake replied. "You can't own people. These girls have thoughts, feelings, hopes, and dreams. They have a right to live free." Victor sighed like a parent dealing with a stubborn child. "Mr. Garrison, let me be clear. Helix Corporation has more lawyers than your entire colony has citizens. We can tie up your courts for decades. We can impose trade sanctions that will destroy your economy. We can make your life very, very difficult." He gestured to the armed men around him. "Or we can simply take what belongs to us by force. The choice is yours." Nara stepped forward, her golden eyes blazing. "We will never go back to that place. You tortured us. You experimented on us. You killed our parents when they tried to protect us." Her voice cracked with emotion. "We would rather die than return to your cages." Victor looked at her with mild interest, like a scientist examining a lab animal. "Ah, Subject 7, you were always the defiant one. Perhaps we should have adjusted your behavioral programming more aggressively." Jake felt rage boiling up inside him. He stepped in front of Nara protectively. "You need to leave, now." "We'll leave when we have our property," Victor said. "You have 24 hours to comply. After that, we will use whatever means necessary to recover our assets." The Helix vehicles drove away, leaving a cloud of dust behind them. Jake watched them go, his mind racing. 24 hours. That was not enough time to fight a legal battle. It was not enough time to run. It was barely enough time to prepare. Nara grabbed his arm. "What do we do? They'll come back, they'll take us." Jake looked at her scared face and thought of the other 4 sisters inside the house. They were counting on him. They trusted him to protect them. He could not fail them. "We fight," he said. He spent the next few hours making calls. He called Grace and Molly. He called Ben and Sheriff Daniel Cooper. He called every neighbor who had ever shown kindness to the Dragon Sisters, every colonist who believed in doing what was right. "Helix Corporation is coming for those children," Jake told them. "They're calling them property, assets, specimens, but we know the truth. They're part of our community now, and I'm asking you to help me protect them." The responses surprised him. Some people refused, too scared of corporate power to take a stand, but many others said yes, more than he expected, more than he hoped. As the sun set on the day before the deadline, vehicles began arriving at Jake's farm. Ben came in his repair truck, loaded with tools that could double as weapons. Grace brought medical supplies. Molly brought cameras and recording devices to document everything. Sheriff Daniel Cooper came with his deputies, all of them ready to defend the children. And they were not alone. Dozens of colonists came, farmers and miners and shopkeepers, ordinary people who decided that some things were worth fighting for. They parked their vehicles in a wide circle around the farmhouse and waited for the dawn. Nara watched them through the window, tears streaming down her face. "Why are they doing this? They barely know us." Jake put his hand on her shoulder. "Because that's what good people do. They stand up for each other." The twins came downstairs, clutching each other's hands, followed with Pip in her arms. They gathered in the living room as the night grew darker and the tension grew heavier. "Are they going to take us away?" Pip asked in her small voice. Jake knelt down and looked into her golden eyes. "Not while I'm alive, little star. Not while any of us are alive." He pulled all 5 sisters into a hug, holding them tight as the hours ticked toward morning. Outside, the colonists built fires and kept watch. Somewhere above them, the Helix cruiser waited like a predator in the dark. The battle for his family was about to begin. And Jake Garrison was ready to fight. The sun rose on the morning of the deadline, casting golden light across the frozen landscape of New Montana. Jake stood on his porch with a cup of coffee in his hand, watching the colonists who had gathered to protect his family. There were nearly 100 of them now, men and women who had come from all corners of the colony to take a stand. At exactly 9 o'clock, the Helix vehicles appeared on the horizon. This time, there were more of them. 5 armored transports rolled toward the farm, followed by the sleek black car carrying Victor Hayes. They stopped at the edge of the property line, blocked by the wall of colonist vehicles. Victor stepped out of his car and surveyed the scene with obvious annoyance. He walked forward until he stood face to face with Jake, separated only by a low fence. "This is foolish, Mr. Garrison," Victor said. "Do you really think a handful of farmers can stop Helix Corporation? We have resources you cannot imagine. We have connections in every government in this sector. This little show of defiance will only make things worse for you and your colony." Jake took a slow sip of his coffee. "Maybe so, but these people didn't come here because they think we can win. They came because they know what's right." Victor's eyes narrowed. "Sentiment will not protect you from corporate law." "No," said a new voice, "but public opinion might." Everyone turned to see Molly walking forward with a small device in her hand. She held it up so Victor could see the blinking light on its surface. "This conversation is being broadcast live to every news network in the sector," Molly said calmly. "We also have drone cameras recording everything from multiple angles. Right now, millions of people across the galaxy are watching a major corporation threaten to use armed force against children." Victor's face went pale. "That's illegal surveillance. Those recordings cannot be used." "That's for the courts to decide," Molly replied. "But in the meantime, the story is already out there. Helix Corporation experimenting on sentient children, creating intelligent beings in laboratories and calling them property, sending armed soldiers to tear orphans away from their adoptive family." She smiled sweetly. "How do you think your shareholders will react?" The standoff continued for 3 long days. Helix brought in more security forces, but they did not dare attack while the cameras were rolling. News reporters arrived from across the sector, setting up camps around the farm and broadcasting daily updates. The story spread like wildfire across the galactic networks. People were outraged. Protesters gathered outside Helix headquarters on a dozen different worlds. Investors began selling their shares. Politicians who had been friendly to the corporation suddenly refused to take their calls. The tide of public opinion had turned against Helix in a way they never expected. On the 4th day, Victor Hayes received a message from his superiors. Jake watched him read it, watched his face twist with frustration and defeat. When he looked up, his cold eyes were filled with barely controlled rage. "Helix Corporation is withdrawing its claim," Victor said through gritted teeth. "The board has decided that continuing this dispute is not in the company's best interest." A cheer went up from the colonists. Jake felt his legs go weak with relief. It was over. They had won. But Victor was not finished. He stepped closer to Jake, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "This isn't over, farmer. Helix has a long memory. One day, when the cameras are gone and the world has forgotten, we'll be back." Jake looked him straight in the eye. "And we'll be ready. Now get off my land." Victor turned and walked back to his car without another word. The Helix vehicles drove away, disappearing over the horizon one by one. As the last transport vanished from sight, Jake felt someone grab his hand. He looked down to see Pip standing beside him, her golden eyes shining with tears. "They're gone," she asked hopefully. "They're really gone." Jake picked her up and held her close. "They're gone, little star, you're safe." The celebration that followed lasted well into the night. The colonists built a great bonfire and shared food and drinks. The twins played their guitar and sang songs of victory and hope. Ben got so happy that he danced with Grace until they both collapsed laughing. Even Sheriff Daniel Cooper smiled, something Jake had never seen him do before. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy continued to watch New Montana. The colonial government officially granted the Dragon Sisters refugee status. Molly filed adoption papers on Jake's behalf. Independent investigators began looking into Helix Corporation's genetic research programs, uncovering evidence of horrific experiments and violations of sentient rights. 1 month after the standoff, a courier arrived at Jake's farm with an official document. Jake opened it with trembling hands and read the words printed on the page. The application for adoption had been approved. Nara, Sierra, and Pip were now legally his daughters. Jake sat down on the porch steps, tears streaming down his weathered face. He had not cried since funeral, but these were different tears. These were tears of joy. The Dragon Sisters found him there a few minutes later. They crowded around him, worried expressions on their small faces. "What's wrong?" Nara asked. "Is it bad news?" Jake shook his head and showed them the document. Was the first to understand. She let out a squeal of happiness and threw her arms around his neck. The twins joined in, then Pip, and finally even serious Nara, who buried her face in Jake's shoulder and cried. That evening they sat together on the porch watching the twin suns set. Pip was asleep in Jake's lap, her tiny wings twitching in pleasant dreams. The twins hummed a soft melody, leaned against Jake's shoulder, and Nara sat close beside him. "Dad," Nara said quietly. It was the first time she had called him that. "Why did you help us? That first night when you found in your barn, you could have turned us away. You had no reason to get involved in our problems." Jake was silent for a long moment, thinking about his answer. He looked at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky, millions of points of light stretching out into forever. "Because someone helped me once when I had nothing," he finally said. "A long time ago when I was alone and afraid, a stranger gave me kindness when I didn't deserve it. That kindness changed my life." He looked at Nara and smiled. "And because love isn't something you run out of. The more you give, the more you have." Nara nodded slowly, understanding in her golden eyes. She leaned her head against his shoulder and said nothing more. Jake held his daughters close and watched the stars come out. The universe was vast and often cruel. There were corporations and governments and forces beyond counting that cared nothing for the lives of ordinary people. But here, on this small farm on the edge of human space, love had won. And that was enough. That was everything.